Hi, it's Sue. Thanks for joining me for today's Bible reading for April 24th, and I'm reading 2 Kings 9 through 11. Now, if you were here yesterday, they left us on a little bit of a cliffhanger. So let's see how the story continues today. Verse 1. Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, "Put your belt on your waist, take this vial of oil in your hand, and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you come there, find Jehu the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, and go in and make him rise up from among his brothers and take him to an inner room. Then take the vial of oil and pour it on his head and say," now let me stop. I'm going to go back and reread some of that because I like to kind of get a little grounded in a story before I continue reading it. Now remember, like I always say, this is Bible reading, not Bible study. I'm trying not to make a whole lot of definitive points, and I do that on purpose, okay? I'm trying to put questions out there, thought-provoking questions about what we're reading. And if you know some answers and you want to talk about it, feel free to comment. But there is a subject about this belt. Why did he say put a belt on his waist? There is something to this belt that the prophets wore. And okay, and having to do with the skirts and all that. There's a whole teaching involved in that. So something interesting you may want to look up if you want to do that study. And if you know anything about it, feel free to comment. So I think it's interesting. It said, put your belt on your waist and take this vial and go. Was he a runner? They had runners in those days. So I'm trying to get a visual here of what he did. So he says, when you come there, find Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, and go in and make him rise up from among his brothers and take him to an inner room. Then take the vial of oil and pour it on his head and say, Yahweh says, I have anointed you king over Israel. This is Jehu, a very important player in this story. Then open the door, flee, and don't wait. So the young man, even the young man, the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. When he came, behold, the captains of the army were sitting. Then he said, I have a message for you, captain. Jehu said, to which of us all? He said, to you, O captain. He arose and went into the house. Then he poured the oil on his head and said to him, Yahweh the God of Israel says, I have anointed you king over the people of Yahweh, even over Israel. You must strike your master Ahab's house, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of Yahweh at the hand of Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab every one who urinates against the wall, both him who is shut up and him who is left at large in Israel. Now, this is funny. It's a funny part when he gives him this word and then books, just runs, tells him the word and then runs out. But let me stop here because over and over, it's been talking about everyone who urinates against a wall. Okay, I don't remember ever reading that in any of the other 5, 7, 8 versions that I've read. So maybe it's written differently. Maybe I just glazed over when I read it. But coincidentally, today I saw a little YouTube short that was a History Channel, and it talked about these shields that they placed around certain valuable buildings in somewhere in Europe. I forget where it was. And they're still there in some places today, so that to protect the buildings. It was like a splash guard, so that if somebody tried to urinate there, it would splash back on them, on their body and on their legs and on their feet. So that tells you something of how the cities developed, over the years, and they didn't have any public restrooms. And, anyway, one of the ways they tried to solve that problem. So it's just funny here that it talks about this practice. So that was quite a little diversion, but let me go here. For the whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab everyone who urinates against a wall, both him who is shut up and him who is left at large in Israel. I will make Ahab's house like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah. The dogs will eat Jezebel on the plot of ground of Jezreel, and there shall be no one to bury her. Then he opened the door and fled. Cracks me up. Verse 11. When Jehu came out to the servants of his Lord, and one said to him, Is all well? Is everything okay? I'm sure he had oil dripping down on him, so they had to suspect what happened. But they said, Is all well? Why did this mad fellow come to you? They're like, "What was that all about? What happened? What'd he say?" They want to know. Um, so he said to them, "You know the man and how he talks." They said, "That is a lie. Tell us now." He said to me, Yahweh says, "I have anointed you king over Israel." Then they hurried, and each man took his cloak and put it under him on the top of the stairs, and blew the trumpet, saying, "Jehu is king." So Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram was keeping Ramoth Gilead, he and all Israel, because Hazael, king of Syria. But King Joram had returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. Remember that happened yesterday. That's where we ended. So Jehu said, "If this is your thinking, then let no one escape and go out of the city to go to tell it in Jezreel." So Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to see Joram. It's interesting. It says, well, never mind. I won't go in that direction. So it says, the king of Judah had come down to see Joram. Now the watchman was standing on the tower in Jezreel, and he spied the company of Jehu as he came, and said, "I see a company." Joram said, "Take a horseman and send to meet them, and let him say, 'Is it peace?'" So one went on horseback to meet him, and said, "Thus says the king, 'Is it peace?'" Jehu said, "What do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me." The watchman said, "The messenger came to them, but he isn't coming back." Then he sent out a second on horseback, who came to them and said, "Thus says the king, 'Is it peace?'" Jehu answered, "What do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me." The watchman said, "He came to them, and he isn't coming back." The driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. Isn't that interesting? They knew about Jehu's driving. Like they could distinctly tell who was driving the chariot by the way he rode. That's fascinating. I love those little tidbits. Joram said, "Get ready." They got his chariot ready. Then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, so both of them, each in his chariot, and they went to meet Jehu and found him on Naboth the Jezreelite's land. When Joram saw Jehu, he said, "Is it peace, Jehu?" He answered, "What peace, so long as the prostitution of your mother Jezebel and her witchcraft abound?" Joram turned his hands and fled, and said to Ahaziah, "This is treason, Ahaziah." Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and struck Joram between the arms, and the arrow went out at his heart, and he sunk down in his chariot. Then Jehu said to Bidkar his captain, "Pick him up and throw him in the plot of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember how, when you and I rode together after Ahab his father, Yahweh laid this burden on him. Surely I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, says Yahweh, and I will repay you in this plot of ground, says Yahweh. Now therefore take and cast him into the plot of ground according to Yahweh's word." But when Ahaziah, okay, stop. This is a lesson learned right here, because this is an example of having a word of God, but also having to do something to help fulfill it. Because he knew that God had given this word, that this vindication would come on that land, then he knew where to put Joram's body because of that word. Did you catch that? This is in chapter 9. All right. Yeah, this is a long chapter. I'm surprised we're still in chapter 9. So he says, pick him up. I'm going to read that little tidbit again. Pick him up and throw him in the plot of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember how, when you and I rode together after Ahab his father, Yahweh laid this burden on him. Surely I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, says Yahweh, and I will repay you in this plot of ground, says Yahweh. Now therefore take and cast him into the plot of ground according to Yahweh's word. But when Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw this, he fled by the way of the garden house. Jehu followed after him and said, "Strike him also in the chariot." They struck him at the ascent of Gur, Gur, which is by Ibleam. He fled to Megiddo and died there. His servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in the tomb with his fathers in David's city. In the 11th year of Joram, son of Ahab, Ahaziah began to reign over Judah. So Joram's 11 years up in Israel. Now Ahaziah over Judah, down the south. When Jehu had come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her eyes and adorned her head, and looked out the window. As Jehu entered in at the gate, she said, "Do you come in peace, Zimri, you murderer of your master?" He lifted up his face to the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out to him. He said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and some of her blood was sprinkled on the wall and on the horses. Then he trampled her underfoot. When he had come in, he ate and drank. Then he said, See now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." They went to bury her, but they found no more of her than her skull, the feet, and the palms of her hands. Therefore, how gruesome is this? The Bible is really something. So it says, "Therefore they came back and told him. He said, This is Yahweh's word, which he spoke by his servant Elisha the Tishbite, saying, The dogs will eat the flesh of Jezebel on the plot of Jezreel, and the body of Jezebel will be dung on the face of the field of Jezreel's land, so that they won't say, This is Jezebel." Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. Jehu wrote letters and sent to Samaria to the rulers of Jezreel, even the elders, and to those who brought up Ahab's sons, saying, "Now as soon as this letter comes to you, since your master's sons are with you, and you have chariots and horses, a fortified city also, and armor, select the best and fittest in your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house." But they were exceedingly afraid, and said, "Behold, the 2 kings didn't stand before him. How then shall we stand? He who was over the household, and he who was over the city, the elders also, and those who raised the children, sent to Jehu, saying, "We are your servants, and we will do all that you ask. We will not make any man king. You do that which is good in your eyes." Then he wrote a letter a second time to them, saying, "If you are on my side, and if you will listen to my voice, take the heads of the men who are your master's sons, and come to me in Jezreel tomorrow by this time." Now the king's sons, being 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who brought them up. When the letter came to them, they took the king's sons and killed them, even 70 people, and put their heads in baskets and sent them to Jezreel. A message came and told him, "They have brought the heads of the king's sons." He said, "Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning." In the morning he went out and stood and said to all the people, "You are righteous. Behold, I conspired against my master and killed him. But who killed all these? Know that nothing will fall to the earth of Yahweh's word, which Yahweh spoke concerning Ahab's house." So remember, I said there's a verse somewhere that says not one of his precious promises will fail. Not one of God's promises will fail. And here it is repeated here. Know now that nothing will fall to earth of Yahweh's word. Nothing. And so I also think it's interesting that he puts those 2 heaps of heads. I think that's just a part of securing his kingdom and establishing his rule, which seems and is barbaric and terrifying. Something terrorists would do. You can picture that. Never mind that thought. Well, you can just picture that in some terrorist societies, right, where they do these terrifying things by hanging the dead and letting everyone see them and using them for examples. But at the same time, even a righteous leader in these days has to use certain tactics to establish their rule, and it's really what's best and safest for the people, right? If he can secure his reign and the respect of the people, they're going to be that much safer. It's just food for thought. You even see that today with certain leaders. They may seem brash or arrogant or unconventional, diplomatic, and yet there are certain types of diplomacy that need to be much stricter and stronger statement in order to secure a country. And in some cases, though it may seem harsh, it's actually what's best. I think there's wisdom there. So let me find where I left off. So yeah, that's true even of a righteous leader. Okay, so just because he put those pile of heads, he said, "Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning," does not mean he was psycho. It was, you have to fight fire with fire sometimes. Verse 9. In the morning he went out and stood and said to all the people, "You are righteous. Behold, I conspired against my master and killed him, but who killed all these? Know now that nothing will fall to earth of Yahweh's word, which Yahweh spoke concerning Ahab's house. For Yahweh has done that which he spoke by his servant Elijah." So Jehu struck all that remained in Ahab's house in Jezreel, and with all his great men, his familiar friends, and his priests, until he left no one remaining. He rose and departed and went to Samaria. As he was at the shearing house of the shepherds on the way, Jehu met with the brothers of Ahaziah king of Judah and said, "Who are you?" They answered, "We are the brothers of Ahaziah. We are going down to greet the children of the king and the children of the queen." He said, "Take them alive." They took them alive and killed them at the pit of the shearing house, even 42 men. He didn't leave any of them. When he had departed from there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him. He greeted him and said to him, "Is your heart right, as my heart is with your heart?" Jehonadab answered, "It is." "If it is, give me your hand." He gave him his hand, and he took him up to him with him in the chariot. He said, "Come with me and see my zeal for Yahweh." So they made him to ride in his chariot. When he came to Samaria, he struck all who remained to Ahab in Samaria until he had destroyed him, according to Yahweh's word, which he spoke to Elijah. Jehu gathered all the people together and said to them, "Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much. Now therefore call to me all the prophets of Baal and all his worshippers and all his priests. Let no one be absent, for I have a great sacrifice to Baal. Whoever is absent, he shall not live." But Jehu did deceptively, intending to destroy all the worshippers of Baal. Jehu said, "Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal." So they proclaimed it. Jehu sent through all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left that didn't come. They came into the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. He said to him who kept the wardrobe, "Bring out robes for all the worshippers of Baal." So he brought robes out on them. Jehu went with Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, into the house of Baal. Then he said to the worshippers of Baal, "Search and see that none of your servants of Yahweh are here with you, but only the worshippers of Baal." So they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had appointed for himself 80 men outside, and said, "If any of the men whom I bring into your hand escape, and who lets him go, his life shall be for the life of him." As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and to the captains, "Go in and kill them. Let no one escape." So they struck them with the edge of the sword. The guard and the captains threw the bodies out and went into the inner shrine of the house of Baal. They brought out the pillars that were in the house of Baal and burned them. They broke down the pillar of Baal and broke down the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. Then thus Jehu destroyed Baal out of Israel. However, Jehu didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, with which he made Israel to sin, the golden calves that were in Bethel and that were in Dan. Yahweh said to Jehu, "Because you have done well in executing that which is right in my eyes, and have done so to Ahab's house, according to all that was in my heart, your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation." But Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of Yahweh, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam, with which he made Israel to sin. In those days, Yahweh began to cut away parts of Israel, and Hazael struck them in the borders of Israel, from the Jordan eastward. All the land of Gilead, the Gadites and the Reubenites and the Manassites, from Aor, which is by the valley of Arnon, even Gilead and Bashan. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did and all his might, aren't they written in the book of the chariots of the kings of Israel? Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. Jehoaz his son reigned in his place. The time that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. Chapter 11, last one for today. Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal offspring. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were slain, even him and his nurse, and put them in a bedroom, and hid them from Athaliah, so that he was not slain. He was with her, hidden in Yahweh's house 6 years. Wow. 6 years they kept that kid in there hidden. That's amazing. 6 years while Athaliah reigned over the land. In the 7th year, Jehoiada sent and fetched the captains over hundreds of the Kerites and of the guard, and brought them to him unto Yahweh's house, and made a covenant with them, and made a covenant with them in Yahweh's house, and showed them the king's son. He commanded them, saying, "This is what you must do. A third of you who come in on the Sabbath shall be keepers of the watch of the king's house. A third of you shall be at the gate, sir, as you are, and a third of you at the gate behind the guard. So you shall keep the watch of the house and be a barrier. The 2 companies of you, even all who go out on the Sabbath, shall keep the watch of Yahweh's house around the king. You shall surround the king, every man with his weapons in his hand, and he who comes within the ranks, let him be slain. Be with the king when he goes out and when he comes in." The captains over hundreds did according to all that Jehoiada, now that's a centurion, isn't it? The captain over 100. Anyway, it says they did all that according to Jehoiada the priest commanded, and they each took his men, those who were to come in on the Sabbath and those who were to go out on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. The priests delivered to the captains over hundreds the spears and shields that had been King David's, which were in Yahweh's house. The guards stood, every man with his weapons in his hand, from the right side of the house to the left side of the house, along by the altar of the house around the king. Then he brought out the king's son and put the crown on him and gave him the covenant. Wow, and he's so young. And they made him king and anointed him, and they clapped their hands and said, "Long live the king." When Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, and she came to the people into Yahweh's house, and she looked, and behold, the king stood by the pillar, as the tradition was, with the captains and the trumpets by the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced and blew trumpets. Then Athaliah tore her clothes. So here is a huge rejoicing when the people see that the actual rightful king is put in place, because the throne had been usurped. So they protected him and set it up so he could be restored to the throne, and great rejoicing. Remember that the great joy that comes when you put things in God's order. So again, it says, and all the people of the land rejoiced and blew trumpets. Then Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, "Treason, treason." Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of hundreds who were set over the army, and said to them, "Bring her out between the ranks. Kill anyone who follows her with the sword." For the priest said, "Don't let her be slain in Yahweh's house." So they made way for her, and she went by the way of the horses' entry to the king's house, and she was slain there. Jehoiada made a covenant between Yahweh and the king and the people, that they should be Yahweh's people, also between the king and the people. All the people of the land went to the house of Baal and broke it down. His altars and his images broke they in pieces thoroughly, and killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. The priest appointed officers over Yahweh's house. He took the captains over hundreds, and the Kerites, and the guards, and all the people of the land, and they brought down the king from Yahweh's house, and came by the way of the gate of the guard to the king's house. He sat on the throne of the kings. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet. They had slain Athaliah with the sword at the king's house. Jehoash was 7 years old when he began to reign. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. God bless you.